Simkiket, Simkiket, Sigadam Hanak, Likakiket, Kapawaltsik, Hlu Waltsik. I got a little presentation for you. Now, we will be going more in depth into the information that I'm just about to share tomorrow at the library at 2 p.m. I apologize for the late notice, but this will be a series of presentations that we will be giving of our Adaawx, our history, and Adaawx, and various other elements of our culture. So we'll begin here today with three nations in particular: Tsm'syen, Nisga'a, and Gitxsan. Tsm'syen nation would be located along the Skeena River. So Somalia, real true language. That'll be another highlight of the presentation in which will be given. So the Tsm'syen nation, so as I was saying, this is along the Skeena River and all of its tributaries. Now, Tsm'syen is the peoples that come out of the Tsm'syen nation. It was eventually shortened to Tsm'syen. There is an extensive Adaawx. There's a history to that. When you think of the Tsm'syen nation, that will be running along the Skeena River in British Columbia, Canada, and all of the tributaries that belong to that. Alachkibu, the Wolf clan, Gaba crest. They would be the most ancient of the clans. So there's 4 clans within the Tsm'syen nation, and you can think of these as 4 distinct families, representative of each of the 4 crests, the main crests, and there's 842 subcrests. Many details to the Tsm'syen nation, but it basically dates back to the last great flood, and the eagle people of that time were able to take on their eagle form. They flew up to the heavens, Lachski, on high, and wherever they're down landed, the waters would start to subside. Thus we were saved. Those that survived the flood are referred to as Tsm'syen. So inside the river of mists, juice of the clouds. We got a little photo of a portion of the Skeena River here. So Adaawx would be our ancestral matriarchal law. If you want to know who you are, you have to first and foremost understand who your mother is and where she comes from. You will take on her identity and perhaps, possibly, her roles and responsibilities that relate to you being a direct descendant of certain matriarchs. So it's usually the eldest daughter of the matriarch and then her eldest, and on it goes. This is the manner of succession. Adaawx, should this successor not live up to their roles and responsibilities, then another candidate will be considered, and that would be of the second eldest daughter of the current matriarch, and then their eldest son or daughter, and then down to the third, their eldest. If that doesn't work out, then we go back up to the top, the second eldest children of the eldest daughter, and then the top 3, we keep going through the candidates, if you will. The direct inheritors, being the eldest of the eldest daughter, would be considered Hlu Waltsik, and they are the first to be considered. And then as you go down the line, this might be considered Gaba Waltsik. That would be the position that I currently find myself in, for I am the youngest within my family, and my mother, my grandmother, my grandmother's mother, and onward and so forth, stretch back to a very ancient point in time. We're just trying to give you a brief outline here. Tsm'syen nation, so we'll move on. Nisga'a nation, so this would be the Nass Valley and all the tributaries. Their term for their law is Adaawx. So very similar to Adaawx, as you will see. And indeed, there is common law up and down the coast, from the Tsm'syen nation to the Salish, Kwakwaka'wakw, very similar customs of the law in our practices, which basically, from my understanding, all up and down the coast, they state that we were once in the house of the Creator. And the more we fell out of this law, we began to form the dance societies, right? And this is how we make ourselves whole. We forget the law. We descended from the heavens. We were asked to leave the house of the Creator. So we did. Amaget, he had to go around all the nations and relearn who he was. So that's where we are now, and we invite you to our presentation tomorrow, again, at Prince Rupert Library at 2 p.m. And so that will be January 11th, 2023. This could be what you may consider the beginning of the rekindling of the clans. I being a representative of Ganhara Gag, so Ganhara meaning of safe harbor, and Gag is of course the main crest for that clan. And as we've stated, there's many other subcrests below that, specific Adaawx to regions and migrations of Tsm'syen as we went through the west coast. Nisga'a, we'll just briefly touch on Adaawx, so that's in the Nass Valley, and then Gitxsan Nation, that's just north of us. There is traditional names and boundaries, and it should be all fleshed out properly. I'm giving you Western coordinates and understandings of these areas, but we're really trying to get that traditional kind of stuff back. So Gitxsan, my father happens to come from the Gitxsan Nation, and he was a wolf. That was his clan. And so their term for their law is Adaawx. Very similar practices, for instance, the Black Feast. When a person passes on and they have a title, then the father clan will take this title off in the Black Feast and place it on another person. And then the Red Feast, of course, which takes place about a year after the passing, would be a time considered when the name is worn. Now, Tsm'syen, I being Tsm'syen, I have somewhat a little bit more knowledge of that, but very similar. We would go on to the Adaawx feast, and that is when the name is considered being strengthened, and then the Adaawx feast, and that is when the title is considered to be held by the living embodiment of that title. So the Tsm'syen, the chief, has been trained in all of the ways of Adaawx and Adaawx. And at that point, they could raise their pitsan, their totem pole, if you will. This will complete their station within the land. So Tsm'syen, so Sim, meaning real, true. Algach, meaning language. So Tsm'syen, real, true language. And it's very interesting that there's many dialects of Tsm'syen, not just on the West Coast, even South America and perhaps even other areas. Quite fascinating. And Tsm'syen said to have been made to sound like the land it inhabited. The real, true language. Skurs, so that's the beside language, southern dialect. So there's many dialects, even within the Tsm'syen Nation. We will be covering this in more detail in the presentation tomorrow. So Ganim, upriver dialect, shared between the Nisga'a and the Gitxsan. So of course it was important to interact with other nations and understand one another. And there was people within each tribe whose job it was to have intimate knowledge of other nations, their practices, their slight tweaks, if you will, to the law, which type of gifts they may have preferred, was all very well considered when we are interacting with one another. It was a culture of reciprocity across all nations and meritocracy. So you had to be engaged with the culture. You had to lead your people. You had to wisely apply the Adaawx in order to ascend through these titles. It wasn't just enough, you see, to be born into a position. So now we have Chinook. So this is jargon, a hybrid language, simplified in vocabulary and grammar to communicate with others, developed for trade, commerce, northwest coast wide. So the rivers, you see, connected everything. And once those trees started to come around, the west coast wasn't always like this. It may have been in darkness pretty much 24/7, -11 year-round, right? It appears something happened to the planet, rewrote the face of it, whatever that might be. And it seems like these major catastrophes, these shifts in the nature of the planet occurred many, many times. Aside from all that, there is still a lot of connection and similarity all up and down the coast. So now we'll go on to Gitxsan. So this is the knowledge that is supposed to be passed down through all generations. That's through the matriarch of the tribe within that house. And there's also, within the rankings, representatives that can speak on the entire nation. And this was all considered, and it was all put in place for peace and harmony. Now, when there was conflicts and such, perhaps some people were playing more power politics, and they're looking at these titles as prizes. That's when a lot of disharmony started to creep into our culture. The Adaawx is very clear, and it was put in place for us to become whole once again and become near that what we were in the house of the Creator, to restore our soul. It wasn't about power politics and land and resources. It was definitely about taking care of one another, applying the law in a loving, wise way, being very strong, but always aiming towards peace. Gitxsan. This will have to be passed down for all generations. Petech, phratries, clans, 4 total. Say there is a passing in the Adaawx clan. It was up to all ravens to support one another. That clan, that crest, that raven crest, is part of their Gitxsan, part of their intellectual property. It belonged to their clan, and it was shared throughout the nations. There was representation of clans all throughout the nations, not least in Tsm'syen, who has all 4 present. So Tepk, he makes himself crests, 842 total. So these are very specific. There's subcrests from the main 4, and this relates to the migration of families and various events that occurred while they were establishing themselves in perhaps different lands or in areas in which they reside for many thousands of years. All of the Adaawx is attached to that crest, and it's a physical representation of that history. So that's why there's so many crests. Gitxsan, for all-time distribution to be handed down through the generations. It would be up to you to kind of share that. Oh, right. Awesome. Well, I think that might have been a little bit longer than I hoped for, but again, this is just a taste of the document in which I developed these slides. Many more to come, and all of these points that we're hitting here are just a very superficial kind of approach and outline to these things. We'll be providing more in-depth PDFs and documents as we go along. But for now, this is just a formal invitation for the whole public to come on down and witness the rekindling of the clans as we share our stories, we speak out loud, meet you in person, and it's a pleasure for me to share this with you, and I hope it interests you. There'll be more to come, more videos, more in-depth videos, courses perhaps, and the website will be developed a little bit more. Again, we have this cursory approach to it, of which we have voluminous amounts of data as it pertains to our culture, which has been separated from us for some generations. So this is our attempt to reclaim all of that Gitxsan and then continue to pass on that knowledge down to the next generation for all time. So I thank you so much for watching. Toiset nusum dim al Gitxsan.